Hello, I'm Manueltus, and today I'm going to talk to you about the importance of religion in politics. And what do I mean by that? I don't mean in the sense that any and every political system needs to be a theocracy. That is not exactly what I'm saying. What I am saying, however, is that religion is everywhere, and religion, in many ways, religious positions precede political positions in the reasoning. So, in order to really unpack this, we have to define what exactly a religion is. And there are very many definitions, definitions that try to be very practical, definitions that try to look at how things work out, definitions that try to be materialistic. I think a very useful definition and a definition that is very all encompassing of everything that could be termed a religion is my definition, which I use, which is adherence to metaphysical principles. And this could mean pretty much anything, but it also helps us to distinguish exactly what a religion is from what a religion isn't. So, for example, the classical definitions that a lot of people use, where it involves rituals and beliefs and such things, that would be included on that because somebody is making metaphysical claims and is acting on those claims. Likewise, if a person is a materialist and a nominalist, that is, they hold the metaphysical positions that universals don't exist and that all that really exists is the physical, then that in itself could also be considered a religion. It might not be an organized religion or a religion that has specific beliefs or a religion that, well, it does have specific beliefs, but it's not a religion that has a supernatural element to it. But it would still be considered a religion, just simply a different kind of religion. Okay, so what does this mean for politics, though? Well, the answer is relatively simple because every person, if we understand this idea that people can have metaphysical principles and that they can adhere to those principles, it is likely that almost every person has a religion of some kind. And if you don't want to call it a religion, fine, you can call it a life stance, as some groups do. And these, of course, will necessarily have an impact on political policy because they have an impact on things relating to political policy. What are these things? An understanding of how the world works is obviously going to impact how policies are exercised. Because if you have a belief that things in the world work a certain way, then you act on that belief, that will necessarily follow in how you behave in politics. Because if you were to support a policy that goes against the functions of a world, that is, a policy that you would imagine would be entirely ineffective, then you would be inconsistent, and therefore it would be logical to support a policy that you think would actually work in the real world. Now, this then gets onto the question, and the question is, does everybody agree from a religious standpoint that the world is the same? And the answer is no. People don't actually agree that the world is the same. People actually have entirely different paradigms of how the world works, and therefore of what types of policies would function in the real world. And these paradigms can be expressed through various religious viewpoints. And also another element of this, rather than simply looking at it from a pragmatic perspective of what works and what doesn't work, we can also look at it from an ethical perspective of what is good and what is bad. And there are actually different ethical viewpoints held in different religions. And while a lot of people like to compare the ways in which religions are similar to each other in order to find a common ground, I think it's also important to look at how they are different from each other in order to understand that they actually don't agree on everything. I think a huge example would be abortion. The question of a when is a human life, and when should it be protected, or if it should be protected at all. Those are all questions that are ethical questions, uh, and questions that have an impact on whether or not somebody would support abortion or not. Because let's say if you consider the fetus to be a human life, and you think that killing a person without a trial or a self defense, or not in a case of war or some other instance, would be wrong, then you would consider abortion an unjustified killing. But if you do not consider that fetus to be a person, then it would not be a murder, but it would be an action on an inanimate object or a subhuman creature, depending on your exact viewpoint. Or you could even have viewpoints where it is a person and it is still justified to abort, or where it is not a person and it is also not justified to abort. So there's all sorts of different positions on this, and the exact position people take on this can be influenced by their religious views, or particularly their views on metaphysics. So this therefore has an impact on policy, and for people that consider abortion to be murder, it has a huge impact on policy, because the abortion of very many people to them would be considered a mass murder, and something that, depending on their viewpoint, could perhaps even merit violent responses. And of course, there are instances where there have been cases of domestic terrorism in countries where abortion is practiced, where people have taken the law into their own hands and have attempted to end abortion through force. So in this case, that is an instance. And then on the anti-abortion issue, there's another dichotomy, and that is the dichotomy on whether the mother is also guilty in the event of abortion, where the mainstream pro-life movement tends to see the mother as a victim, that is a victim in ignorance. There is obviously another position where the mother is considered complicit and perhaps even the instigator of a murder, and therefore the mother, under that view, should be punished very strongly. So in that sense, this idea of abortion has multiple ramifications on where it can go morally, and different religious viewpoints or different metaphysical viewpoints are viewpoints that will determine which way that goes. And if it is a position that is so controversial, a position where some people consider it to be a murder, and most countries ban murder, well, actually, now that I think about it, I think every country has some sort of law against some form of murder, and therefore it is always a politically relevant issue, and and the side in which a person takes on this will very frequently depend on their particular religious perspective. Similar things in questions on the LGBT movement, where some people consider it to be something that's entirely fine, and some people consider it to be a great evil. For example, you have people like S.L. Anderson, who thinks that the government should take these type of behavior as a capital offense, and therefore that it should be punishable by death. Whereas there's other people that consider it to be something that's wrong, but something that is not actionable for the government. And then there's people that consider it to be something that is good and perhaps even encourageable. So there's all sorts of different positions on this issue, and many of these positions can be linked back to religion. And this goes another step further, and that is that beyond determining what is practical in the real world and determining what is moral, religions can also have prescriptions on certain ideas of government and certain ideas of justice. And if those prescriptions are taken, then they could be incompatible with the prescriptions of other religions, leading to a conflict. And therefore, religion is actually very important because it can determine what type of system of government is preferable by a particular society. And what does this mean then for a secular society? Well, the answer is that a secular society is not actually an irreligious society. Irreligion in government is not actually a practical irreligion. Rather, it is a compromise position. I think that would be a very good way to put it. It is a compromise position or a more laissez-faire position. That's another way to put it. A position that is either a compromise or a position where the hands are let go and where responsibility is shifted to other sectors of society. So what does this mean? Well, this means that if the practicable actions of a government and the ethical considerations of a government and the determination of which order is proper or improper for a government to take are all religious questions, then all actions that are taken politically are ultimately actions that are derived from some form of religious idea, if we take the idea of this metaphysics to be a definition of religion. So what does this mean, for example? Well, let's say speeding. There's a speed limit on roads, and how is this a religious question at all, you might ask? Well, why is there a speed limit on roads? Well, perhaps it is because the government wants to ensure a certain safety on the roads to ensure that the roads are usable by the general public and for government purposes. Well, if that is true, then why is the government concerned about the usability of its roads or for the safety of the general public? And then that ends up coming into questions of, should the government be doing things for its own use, or should the government be doing things for safety? And why is safety important? Why is it important for people to be safe? Why is this something that people go for? And when you enter into the questions of why is it important for people to be safe, you can go a number of different directions. You can go in the direction of trying to look at it from a biological perspective of why do people care about safety, but some people might say just because people care about safety doesn't mean that safety is actually something that is worth having. And that gets into a number of different questions, because at this point we exit the point where we can talk about statistics and looking at the impacts of this if we're talking about whether safety itself is something that we should be concerned about in the first place. Because you can talk all about traffic statistics and the statistics of car crashes and the statistics of when a road is safe or not, but asking the question, why should the road be safe in the first place, is ultimately a question that goes to your metaphysics, a question that goes to asking, why do we value certain things? Where do our values come from? What is the source of our values? And I say that this source of your values is your religion. This is your metaphysical principles and wherever they come from. So in that sense, the simple question of should there be a speed limit and what should it be is necessarily a religious question. And I would say the same thing about all different laws. Now, does that mean that I favor a theocracy? Does it mean that I favor a system wherein people are actively looking at religion as the immediate source for every single law and demand religious conformity in every aspect. I don't. And the reason I don't is for religious reasons, surprisingly or perhaps unsurprisingly enough, because from my personal religious perspective, I don't think that I can persuade everybody in a society to follow the same religion as me. I simply don't think it's possible, and because I cannot ensure the religious homogeneity of a society, I have to operate under the principle that society might be non-homogeneous, religiously speaking, and therefore I have to provide a society that, in my view, from my own values, I value honesty, that allows people to be honest, but also conforms to some ideas of the ultimate justice, which I hold, but also ensures that whatever happens, I cannot be oppressed by my opponents, and therefore I have to create a society that is balanced, a legal system that is balanced to prevent my opponents from oppressing my particular religious beliefs, while also having a government that is in acknowledgement of particular religious beliefs, while also separating that from the religious function in order to prevent the government from collapsing in on itself from people not actually following these exact religious beliefs. So this means that government is complex from my view. Now, there are some religious viewpoints that consider religious homogeneity to be something that is actually achievable or something that can be ensured in some way, and or perhaps something that would be achievable through the purging of people of other religions, and they would obviously take a different approach. But I follow the ideas that led to the development of the separation of church and state, partially because I see in the past that my particular religious group has been disadvantaged by that position, and that even if they were to be in charge, I don't see it as something that would advantage them in any particular way and would perhaps lead to a situation where my opponents could gain power and overpower me. So some power dynamics play into it, and this is pretty big. So then the question comes, well, what about a common ground? What if we just say that all these different religious considerations, maybe we can get to a common ground where most people can agree upon? And while I would agree that there is such a thing as moral intuitions that people have, I don't agree that everybody necessarily interprets them correctly, or that everybody is uncorruptible in the way that they apply. Because even if somebody interprets their moral intuitions correctly, they can still choose to lie about their moral intuitions, and can choose to live in a way that is against their moral intuitions. So in that sense, this idea of a common ground is actually a pretty dangerous idea, because people can shift goalposts, people can manufacture consent on various ideas, and it can lead to all sorts of deceptions. And I want to live in an honest society, so that's not really something that is very useful. Nevertheless, I think that there are some things that are pragmatically useful for a society, and I don't necessarily need to explain them from the religious route in order to get people to agree that they are pragmatically useful. For example, forbidding murder, theft, and such things, and allowing people to defend themselves if they are attacked. I think that most societies allow this in some form or another, and in that sense, it creates a situation where I would say there's an alignment of people's moral intuitions, but it's not a perfect alignment, and therefore I don't think it's necessarily true or useful to base a political system on the assumption of common moral intuitions, even if people actually do have moral intuitions, because in my experience, people can lie about their moral intuitions or people can misinterpret their moral intuitions. And that's where we end up once again on the LGBT issue, where some people say that their moral intuitions tell them that it's entirely fine, and some people say that their moral intuitions tell them that it's something that is the greatest possible evil. So it ends up in an impasse. And when I say that there's an impasse, I don't mean that there isn't a correct answer. But what I mean is that even if there's the correct answer, I don't think that people that are wrong about the correct answer can be easily necessarily persuaded of the correct answer. And because I don't believe that I can persuade people of the ultimate moral truths, I have to live in a political system wherein I have ultimate moral truths and have access to this, and I think other people also have access to them, but I can't persuade them of them, which leads to an interesting situation politically where I have to base laws on those truths, but not actually make the truth that is supporting the law something that I demand people to fully comprehend because they can't. And that's an interesting idea here. So taking that as a political position, that this is why the idea of the separation of church and state is useful, but nevertheless, I say that though church and state are separated, the religion is always at the center of how the state operates. And there are different religions that are in competition with each other. And this is why there's different political parties. It is because of different religious positions that people hold, different metaphysical understandings, and different understandings on how things work. And this creates different political parties that are in competition. And I would say that some elements of certain political parties are correct, and the corresponding elements of those opposing parties are incorrect. And it leads to an interesting position. I think saying something is interesting might be a shorthand way of saying that it is something that you could spend a lot of time studying, but that isn't quite worth discussing at the moment. So anyway, getting back onto the topic. So I support the separation of church and state while at the same time acknowledging that there is no such thing as the separation of politics from religion. Which means that though I do not attempt to enforce all the people in my society to practice my particular religion, because I, as someone who is an advocate of Reformed theology, don't think that that's actually something that I can do. It's, in my view, it's something that only God can do, and therefore it is not something that I can do. I can promote the gospel. I can talk about my beliefs. I can read the scriptures and preach and proselytize, but ultimately, in my view, it is up to God whether people will be in acknowledgement of the truth or whether they will remain in their ignorance. So, in that sense, their self-imposed ignorance is, I think, a better way to put it. But in that sense, this is pretty interesting in that it means that I base all of my politics on my religious positions while also acknowledging that in general, taking a theocratic approach would be ineffective and would perhaps be harmful due to the potential of co-optation. What do I mean by that? Well, if you don't think that you can actually convert every person in a society, then if your political system is based on a particular religion and you enforce particular religious practices on every person in a society, then you have a large number of people in that society who are not actually genuinely part of that religion, which leads to a decay within that religion because of it being hollowed out. So the solutions that try to create homogeneity can go a number of different ways. You can simply kick out all the people that are the wrong religion and have everybody of the same religion and live in an isolated community. You can execute all of them, and I think that is something that, at least in my religion, is not allowed. You can try to convert as many people as possible, and lower your standards so that you can theoretically convert every person. And when I say theoretically, I mean not in reality, because in reality, since I don't think that's possible, it means that the rate of false conversion is very high, and then the religion rots from the inside and becomes corrupt and heretical. And that is something that I'm certain anybody following any particular religion would not want to happen, although some people might think it's actually possible to achieve that. But anyway, going back onto this, it means that society and its organization on religion will naturally have tension. There's naturally going to be a tension between different religious groups, and it's an unresolvable tension. Because I think that since in my view, I can't guarantee that a person will be of a particular religion, even if I have managed to isolate myself in a society of everybody having that religion, there will eventually emerge people in that society who don't follow that religion. And we see this in all sorts of societies in the world, where certain areas were very devoutly of a certain religion, and now suddenly there's emerging various groups. It might be different groups with different religious beliefs. It might be atheists. It might be whoever, and it leads to a situation where what may have been a homogeneous society becomes a heterogeneous society, which changes the religious makeup. So what is the solution to this? Well, you can separate everybody and atomize all the different religions, and I would still say these separations would emerge, and you'd have to constantly purge the society. You could force a heterogeneous union of all the different societies under one political system, which might create a situation where there's all these different compromises everywhere, and nobody's happy, because there's people that want abortion all the way, there's people that want to ban it completely and they think it's murder, and the other people think it's women's rights, and then people pro-LGBT, anti-LGBT, and then eventually this social quarrel, this religious conflict emerges and grows and grows and grows until it explodes into a conflict that is destructive to the political system. You can have that, and I think that that's the direction a lot of countries have decided to go. And the atomized way doesn't work either, because it leads to a situation where imperialism exists, and therefore you can simply be wiped out by somebody who doesn't take your ultra atomized approach of having only that one religion. And we see this in all sorts of different religious minorities throughout the world that get harassed by other groups, that they try to stay by themselves in their little small group, and then they get conquered by somebody else who wipes them out. And that exists. That happens. So I don't think that that's practical. So what is the solution? If politics is necessarily linked with religion, and if this means that big political questions can't actually be resolved in a religiously heterogeneous society where there's people of different religions with competing interests, and creating a fully homogenous society is impractical. So, what is the solution? If we can't all be together and we can't all be separate, and it leads to all sorts of different problems. Well, the answer, I would say, is to develop a society where there is both unity and separation. And it wouldn't accommodate all different religious viewpoints, but it would allow for a situation where different views can be met. And we see a proto form of this in federalism, where there's different subordinate groups that have a large amount of autonomy in certain ways, but not in other ways. And the Roman Empire had this to some extent as well, where different cities had made their own rules. Um, and in Persia, ancient Persia, there's situations like that. There's all sorts of situations throughout history like this. But I've developed Koinonism, my own idea on how this could work better, on how I can practice my religion without having to oppress others or worry about others oppressing me. But anyway, nevertheless, this is all a thought exercise. But the point remains, in my view, that from the largest to the smallest of laws, religion always has an impact on politics. And therefore, the idea that a society can operate fully secularly, that is, a society's laws can operate without any at all religious considerations, would necessarily indicate that a society would have to operate without any metaphysical concerns, therefore without any value system whatsoever. And if you don't have a value system, you can't really decide which policy is better than any other policy. So that doesn't really make sense. So you have to have a value system, and values are metaphysics, whether you want to be a realist or a nominalist on that, or any other position. And I say that these metaphysical principles are religions, whether they be religions where there is a single authority, a god at the center of it, or whether they be the more materialist religions where you examine how matter works and how that impacts society. So that's my thoughts on the importance of religion in politics, and why, therefore, politics and religion are inseparable. So thank you all for watching. Tell me what you thought. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you have a particular point that I made that you think I should articulate more clearly, or that you have a particular complaint upon? Do you have any ideas for the future? Tell me that in the comment section below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time on Awiltos over and out.